Judges at the International Court of Justice are hearing arguments from Russia and Ukraine about Moscow's claims it launched its invasion to prevent genocide. Ukraine brought the case to the United Nations highest court days after Russia invaded last year. Kyiv accuses Moscow of abusing international law by falsely alleging genocide in eastern Ukraine. Russia wants the case to be thrown out and objects to the court's jurisdiction.
Ukraine is not accusing Russia of committing genocide. Ukraine is also not accusing Russia of failing to prevent or punish genocide. On the contrary, Ukraine insists no genocide has occurred. That alone should be enough to reject the case, because, according to the court's jurisprudence, if there was no genocide, there cannot be a violation of the Genocide Convention.
All right, Geoffrey Nice joins us from Canterbury in the United Kingdom. He is Emeritus Gresham Professor of Law and the former lead prosecutor of the Slobodan Milosevic trial for the United Nations at the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia. Good to have you with us, sir. So first of all, what do you make of the prospects of this case being thrown out of court as Russia is pursuing?
I'm not sure that I'm yet in a position to assess the prospects. It was a very strong decision in the first place in favor of Ukraine, and that was before we reached the merits stage. And I think what will be most interesting in the developing argument over the next few days is not just the position of Ukraine and Russia, or the Russian Federation, but also the 30 other states, which include the United Kingdom, but not, I think, the United States of America, who are allowed to intervene and to make arguments. So impossible to assess the outcome, although the original decision was a very strong one. I think for your listeners and viewers, it's important to understand what this is and what this isn't. Although we would all probably like a nice, straightforward, universal system of international law that means you can say somebody's committing a war crime and stop them doing it. Life isn't like that. It's all bits and pieces. And the bit that the International Court of Justice is and can deal with is alleged breaches of conventions. It's not a criminal court. It's not going to make a criminal finding. But what Ukraine was successful in doing, in raising at the court and now having argued, was to get the court to say that Russia must stop its warlike and warring attitudes and actions in Ukraine. Now, that's a very important provisional finding. And if it's confirmed by the full court, even though the court has no powers of enforcement, and we know enforcement will be blocked at the Security Council by the veto of Russia, that finding would be extremely powerful in the world as a whole. So we must follow the arguments with great care and await the conclusion with great interest.
We must follow. How long do you think this process is going to take to get a final ruling from the full court?
Well, I think I heard this morning that the final hearings are on the 25th, and I imagine they'll then take a month or maybe more, or several months maybe, to reach a decision. But they acted pretty quickly the last time, so one would imagine that they will see the urgency required here and act pretty quickly here.
All right.
And I think, okay, sorry.
I was going to say, going back to the earlier point you made, even if the court upholds the provisional finding that this war should end, that Russia should stop the war, we know that this can't be enforced, right? Practically speaking, it's going to go to the Security Council, it'll be vetoed by the Russians. What practical effect does it have?
Well, the practical effect it has is that other countries may be reinforced in their determination, for example, to apply sanctions on Russia or to carry on providing weaponry in support of Ukraine. And of course, it would leave Russia as a pariah state. So although there's no powers of enforcement, in a sense, how could there be powers of enforcement unless you have an international police force and an international army? A finding that its invasion was not justified, its war is not justified, will have considerable potential follow-on effects. And those of us following perhaps the Western arguments in favor of Ukraine, we would say very positive effects. Most importantly, I think, in sanctions and in the continuing supply of weapons to Ukraine.
Does it at all increase the legal exposure of some of the Russian officials if the full court goes the direction of the Provisional Court? I'm
not sure that it would really, because there's a separate process going on at the International Court, Criminal Court, which is a criminal court and which does have jurisdiction over this particular conflict by reason of submission to jurisdiction by Ukraine. And we know that that court has already issued arrest warrants against Putin and one other in respect of violations of war crimes and crimes against humanity. So it is pursuing a criminal case against individuals. So far, 2 have been identified, but there may be many more to follow. We know that Ukraine is pursuing and successfully pursuing its own criminal proceedings. And although in any of those proceedings, a favorable decision by this court might be prayed in aid, might be referred to, I don't think, but I could be wrong, but I don't think at this stage that a determination by the International Court of Justice would necessarily have binding value in the other courts, not least because there's plenty of evidence that they will have gathered and are relying on, and they might not require the detailed decision of a civil court, as effectively it is, but a court that deals with breaches of treaty in support of its criminal procedures. But that, I'm afraid, is also something we must put on hold, because Ukraine was very inventive in turning to the court in its application to have its right not to be falsely accused of genocide, as you explained in your helpful opening, to have it litigated at this court. And so imaginative lawyering or imaginative use of law by lawyers, not something we often see, but really welcome when we do see it, just may lead to this decision being of wider implication than I suggest.
All right, a lot to keep our eyes on then. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and analysis on that.